by the big cooling tower. They have the plans, but we have the power.
So we'll just start with the general one. Can you explain what directly inspired you to run for union board?
Well, I'm interested in ensuring to make sure the union's actually sustainable in the long term. So it needs to have profitable venture outside of clubs and societies, because clubs and societies is a big drain. But to keep that funded, we need to make sure the union's profitable elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure it is sustainable in the long term.
Cool. We'll probably come back to that stuff a little bit down the track. We'll just get through the intro things first. Secondly, are you aligned with a political party? And if so, can you also describe your political views generally as independent of that party?
So I'm a member of the Liberal Party, but I am a libertarian. So I'm a lot more socially liberal than the party is.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Quick stuff to go through. What are you preferencing other candidates first, second and last?
At this stage, preferences haven't been worked out. I haven't had any discussions with anybody at this stage because it's too early on in the campaign, and I'm not sure where I will go at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And then just in terms of the other candidates, which of the other candidates do you most share political views with, and which ones do you share the least views with?
Probably the most would probably be Jen.
Yep.
Obviously because she's also in the Liberal Party.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there it'd probably be Tia and George would be the closest after her. The ones I'd probably least share political views with would be Marco.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And, I mean, this is the optimism question, but if you were to be elected to the USU, who would you be voting for president?
So we're looking, so Alicia, Liv and Ed are the ones that are looking.
Those are the people who've declared interest thus far?
Yeah. I'd probably vote for Alicia,
mm-hmm.
Because she's the one that most aligns with my own personal views.
Okay, cool. And then one more thing, this is just another little accountability one, but so in the past a lot of candidates have said that they would never seek the votes of Senate appointed directors if they were elected and looking for an exec role, and then a year later they come and they renege on that and they seek the votes of Senate appointed directors. If you were elected, would you ever seek the votes of Senate appointed directors for an executive position?
If I had an interest in the executive position, yes.
Okay, cool.
Alright, so do you support affirmative action on board? Why not?
I don't support affirmative action on board for the sheer fact that we're in one of the most progressive universities in Australia. So I believe women actually do have a very, very good chance of being represented here, as well as the fact it's effectively saying they're not good enough to get up by themselves. I believe that most of the women in this campaign are probably actually the stronger candidates. And I don't think AA will come into play this time. And for that very reason, I actually find that women are generally the stronger candidates in the field, and I actually believe that they don't really need AA to get on board.
Do you think that kind of culture comes from an institution having AA in the first place? Or?
No, I don't think it comes from that. I think it's just the way our university is structured is because we are a very progressive university. Women aren't looked down upon, they're actually put on equal playing field.
Another one would be, like, just within the same sort of vein, like we'll talk through CNS, the University General, the USU, and your views on that. What do you think is the most important USU program and why?
I actually do think it is the Clubs and Societies program because it is the most active part of student life, and it's the one that students see the most.
Mm-hmm.
While I do think the Incubate program is very important, it's also not very well known. So due to that, I don't think it actually has much of an influence. But I think Clubs and Societies is very important for the union.
Well, on the Incubate program specifically, that's one of your major policies. Yep. Can you talk us through what you're proposing there? So
I do actually want to increase funding to the Incubate program because there's only 8 places given with about 50 applications each year. So I do actually want to see the amount of startups, scholarships given in a given year. On top of that, I would also like to make it a little bit easier for students to find students from other faculties with different disciplines. So if they're an engineer and they need a business student, business students can register their interest with the Incubate program, and that way if an engineer needs a business student or a law student or something like that, they can then be matched up with a student if they're not, and they get effectively trying to get a choice. And this is drawing on the UNSW's entrepreneurial program, which they based off the Incubate program and made those few improvements themselves.
Yeah. In terms of how Incubate's run at the moment, do you know much about its finances and how much it takes from the university each year?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So, as far as I know, it's not actually listed as an independent dot point on on the financial report, but
Yeah.
as of 2013, it was receiving in like around $160,000 a year, probably more.
Yeah.
That was one employee plus maintaining the space.
Yeah.
How much more would you be looking to give to it?
I'd want to increase the places up to 15 places at least.
Mm-hmm. So almost double, looking at.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but it wouldn't be double the total cost. It'd only be another $35,000
Okay.
because it's $5,000 startup scholarships.
Okay, cool. And I guess this leads quite good into a question of like where would you get that money from? And the broader question is like if you had to cut $1 million from the USU spending, what would you gut? Like what would you take?
So my first point would be ensuring that the union's making long-term capital investments and looking to outside investors as well to help build their monetary base. So that will help sustain the union in the long term. So if they're making capital investments in areas of campus they don't have a large presence, so engineering's the big one. They've only got the Enjo Cafe there. You can help build up a monetary base. If you're cutting $1 million out of the budget, it'd be pretty difficult to find where to find it, which is why I think it's important that we're actually increasing the monetary base coming into the union.
I guess where in that case, in terms of increasing the monetary base, how much do you see the union as a service provider for students versus more of an activist body?
I see it primarily as a service provider because I think the SRC and Supra both do a good job in the activist sphere of things. And because the union is a service provider, I don't think it should be having a place for student activism.
But I mean, in terms of like simple money, like the USU has far more resources than the SRC could ever hope to. So I guess, do you think there is a place for activism through the University of Sydney Union?
Well, you do see it through the Clubs and Societies program because they do fund all the different sorts of political clubs. So in a way they are funding activism that way, but it's a very bottom-up approach, which I have no problem with that occurring as long as everyone is on equal footing in terms of having access to that funds through the Clubs and Societies program.
And we might just talk about duty for a second on the board. Could you outline a circumstance in which you would think it is reasonable to breach your duty to the board for the greater good?
Well, for the most part, I'm a business-minded person, so I don't believe I would personally breach my duty. But if somebody else did, I would make an assessment based on my own values as to whether I should then vote against them in a censure motion.
Okay, cool.
So you say you don't see the board as much of an activist body. What do you then think of things like Radical Sex and Consent Week and initiatives like that? Would that be something you're looking to continue or scale back?
Well, I think Radical Sex and Consent Week actually was a very important thing. Unfortunately, it didn't really have the same effect that it should have. It took a very serious issue and it sort of trivialised it to a point. Considering throw the ring toss over the dildo was a little bit far-fetched and didn't really relate into it. And again, that's another little bit of wasted funds where you take into account the union spent $300 on dildos, which I don't know if any student would actually justifiably be able to defend that when we're trying to advertise a serious issue that is very prevalent on university campuses. So I actually do see a place for programs such as that as long as they are effectively managed and they don't trivialise the issue.
Okay, well, I guess it might be good to ask a few questions about, like, the board generally then, and your relationship to it. Like, obviously it's heavily an administrative role, so what pertinent experience do you yourself bring to that space, to that job?
So I've got roles not only in the Clubs and Societies program, so I actually can see the amount of bureaucracy that's involved in there, as well as managing multiple clubs. I've got the Economic Society going again. I started the Libertarian Society, and that's been an active club since we started. On top of that, I am on the national board of Australian New Zealand Students for Liberty as a Director of Operations. So I do have board experience in a larger board as well.
Okay, cool.
I guess as President of the Economic Society, you've promoted things like the Milton Freeman pub crawl. Do you think that could be alienating to any of the students, or how have you changed the Economic Society in your tenure?
So that one was just putting an economist on the pub crawl just to help advertising. For the most part, I don't think Milton Friedman is a divisive person in the Economic Society. We have also advertised Keynes as well, because obviously Keynes is seen as the father of modern economics, well, father of modern day economics after Adam Smith's. So I do want to see increased events there. Obviously, there is sort of my own personal bias with economics, but I am trying to run the club as unbiased as possible and reach out to many people and show career opportunities as well after the degree.
Okay, cool. I think we might ask a question now just about another one of your policies. You've talked about increasing club autonomy.
Yep.
And I just want to ask, like, I mean, okay, we'll just ask the first question. What does that constitute to you?
So the main thing with club autonomy at the moment is there is a lot of burden, regulatory burden on clubs at the moment. The biggest ones that I've found have biggest issues at the moment is the incoming rule making each club have to have voting rights to every single access card holder. This has caused a bit of a problem amongst the religious clubs, and this is not just a single religious club, this is across the board. They've got an issue with potentially people that don't follow their faith. They've got no problem with them coming along to the events, learning about the faith, because obviously they're there to promote it. But they're a bit worried about people who don't follow that faith having a say in terms of how the society is run, because they don't follow that same message. So that's my big one at the moment, is pushing to make sure the religious clubs get the same exceptions with voting rights as faculty societies and college clubs do it right now. So that would be my main.
Do faculty societies get any?
They get a bit of a different one. So Art Society, every single arts faculty member is a voting member. I know Law Society, I can't get voting rights because I'm not a law student. And so there's a few of these that have these special permissions around them, and I want to ensure that religious clubs are protected with that exemption.
I mean, why don't we talk about that question, like, in the negative then? Like, what's your approach to, say, clubs which individuals outside those clubs feel alienated by? I mean, historical examples would be things like Life Choices or Bro-Soc. Do you think they should have the autonomy to exist if they are alienating, like, a significant portion of the membership base?
So Life Choice is not, well, they're not a religious society. They advocate other options to abortion. While I personally don't agree with Life Choice, I do believe they do have a place to advocate. They are very careful not to actually mention abortion in any of their stuff, but rather looking at counselling services and other ways to actually look after unexpected pregnancy. So they are a little bit different, and they probably wouldn't be covered under that exemption. Bro-Soc's a little bit different again, because they had different issues arising. So from what I understand is they sort of came up with the men's shed thing after they got dragged in front of the board, which had it just been a men's shed sort of thing, it would have been okay, because men do have a lot of stigma around mental health and are the highest percentage to actually attempt suicide. So it is partially because there is still a lot of stigma around mental health, and I believe anything that sort of promotes awareness of mental health and removing that stigma from it actually should have a place.
So am I accurate that one of your policies is that you want to see at least 50% of staff of the union to be students at the university?
Yep.
Cool. So do you know what the current percentage of staff who are students?
No, I have actually been trying to find that out, but I can't find it anywhere in the USU documents.
So you're not sure how substantive that change would be to make that policy a reality?
Yeah.
Okay. But it does speak, I guess, to respect that you have for students taking on leadership roles and having more power.
Yep.
Do you see that as in any way inconsistent with what you've previously just told us about the Senate-appointed directors seeking their vote and their position on the board, or?
Not really, because a board position is different to staff-based, because I understand the union is a student organisation. As long as the Senate-appointed directors have in their best mind that these appointed executive positions are going to act in the best interest of students, I've got no problem with people going to their vote. So
you've told us that you're not entirely sure how much Incubate is funded and how much you want to increase it by, and you're not entirely sure the percentage of staff that are students. How confident are you in your ability to actually bring about the policies you're proposing?
I'm pretty confident because they are very realistic policies, and I believe most of the other board would probably be on side with ensuring we have student staff in there, because again, the union, being a student-based organisation, understands the needs of students, and understands that they'd have to work around the university schedule to work with the union.
Yeah, I've got So this year the USU's introduced a number of new equity measures with regard to giving free access to low SES students. I mean, my first question is, what do you think of that? I
actually am fully in support of that program. because these people are currently people on low SES loans. Obviously had trouble getting access cards, which then isolates them a lot from different parts of uni life. There has been the union has actually analysed it and seen that there is a possibility of expanding that out. So it is definitely viable, and I actually do not have an issue with it.
And then just as a follow-up, like, what do you think is the sustained benefit for a low SES student with an access card at the moment? Like, do they get as much out of it, say, as compared to like a student who doesn't have to work to support themselves and can devote a lot of time to, you know, the CNS program, which is itself a very time-hungry aspect of life?
I believe that they probably won't get the same amount out of it, but they're still going to get the advantage of being able to go to discounted events, go to free drinks events, have a few beers with mates, meet people out there. And I think that's the main benefit out of giving low SES students access cards, is they can actually go out and meet people with similar interests without having to try and actively look for them in their classes.
So if we talk a little bit about transparency on the board, do you think it's appropriate to discuss certain things like, say, CEO remuneration in camera? Is that kind of thing you would support having more transparency around?
I actually think the board finances should be completely transparent, because again, it is a student-based organisation. There are a few things that do have to remain confidential, but CEO
I've stumbled over that word, money.
How much CEO is paid, that really should be public information to the students.
So in light of that, would you support the full divulgence of all board director-related expenditures, for example, stuff like cab charges, stuff like meal card use, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm fully in support of that.
And then, like, the question this is obviously related to is, do you think the board went far enough or not far enough with respect to how they handled the cab charge scandal earlier this year?
I think they actually handled it really well. They moved against Liam, who was in clear breach of the regulations. As such, he has worked to pay it back, from my understanding, which is good. And it does mean there is some transparency about it now, because I don't know if they've actually removed cab charge privileges or not.
You have to get them prospectively now.
Yeah, which is probably a much better system, because it ensures that it is not being abused.
Okay, so you said earlier when you were answering the question about affirmative action that you think Sydney is a really progressive, inclusive campus, and yet you are one of the more conservative candidates in the field. What sort of specific policies and things would you be looking to do to maintain that progressive inclusivity that you thought was a good thing about Sydney?
Well, I want to actually be running business forums to help women get involved in business, to help them understand how to enter the field, how to get their representation up in the business world. And I believe we could try and extend that out to engineering as well, because engineering and IT women are really underrepresented over there. And I think having these programs to encourage not only current students to partake in these fields, but also trying to get new students coming through out of high school, potentially helping them see these opportunities there as well.
Do you think on some level it's patronising to have you, as opposed to like a woman identifying person, pushing for that?
I think it potentially could be seen that way, but at the same time I do actually just want to see increased women's representation, because ignoring women from the field means you are missing out on a lot of experience and a lot of other things that can be brought forward.
So if the numbers of women on board did start to drop, would you then support the implementation of affirmative action?
I probably
running for board, that is.
So women candidates actually in the field. At the same time, probably not, for the sheer fact you look at this field, up until about a week before the campaign, it was looking like there was only going to be 3 female candidates, and Shannon and Lamise nominated, so affirmative action has the potential to increase it, but at the same time, if you look at the amount of female candidates in the large field we have now, it is largely representative of males, unfortunately. But again, I do think that female candidates are the better candidates in the field in terms of how they present themselves, experience, as well as their ability to actually go out and talk to people, because they are much more personable than some of the males in the field.
But just to confirm, if that changed, you wouldn't then support the reintroduction of affirmative action?
No, I'd still encourage the forums that go about encouraging women to run, which is currently run by Kate Bullen as the women's officer, from my understanding. And I'd be completely supportive of these programs continuing to try and encourage women to run on board.
We've got a few questions from our readers as well that have just been sent in, so I'll go through a few of those. The first one is on the topic of BROSOC. If BROSOC were to reform the elements of itself that were seen to be problematic, would you support their being integrated into the CNS program?
Provided they are running themselves as a safe space for men with mental health, as long as it's inclusive of all men. So it isn't isolationary towards those that aren't seen as manly. And as long as it is run as a men's shed, I'd have no sort of problem with them being incorporated, so they would have to ensure that that is the case.
What's your personal opinion just on the choice of name?
I don't really see a problem with the name, but again, if other directors did want to change it, I also wouldn't. I could potentially be swayed as well.
If you were elected to board, what improvements would you do for USU democracy generally? And this question has specified like voting system, but it can be however you interpret the question.
Okay. Well, the biggest problem with USU at the moment is voter turnout in terms of democracy, because it's got 16,000 members, roughly 4,000 to 5,000 each year vote, which is still an incredibly low turnout. So I think we need to make students a bit more aware that elections are going on, that they can actually nominate, because if you do look at the field, it is largely people who are doing degrees with a lot less access, like a lot less on-campus time. So it is largely art students, plus we do have a few science students in the field, and myself, who I guess is considered an economic student based on my faculty. Well, sorry, not economic student, art student, just because of where the faculty is, and I am in a degree with low contact hours. So I believe the biggest issue in terms of that is making it accessible to those in other degrees outside of the standard low contact hours degrees.
And just in terms of the board historically, so in the last few years it's made quite a major transition towards activism. And you might remember during last year's board election that there was like a ceasefire negotiated during the National Day of Action, which saw that all campaigning halted so that candidates and campaigners could take part in a rally. Next week we have a similar rally going on the Tuesday during the soapbox. Would you support the postponing of the soapbox to allow students to take part in the rally?
Well, at this point, probably not, due to the fact that the soapbox has already been advertised as that date. Most students have taken that into account in their schedules. They want to go and see it. So the biggest problem with that is in terms of the fact that the soapbox date has actually been known for a while. So I wouldn't actually be pushing for the postponement of the soapbox.
And then just generally, what do you think of board directors using their positions as members on the board to agitate for activist causes? For example, we saw a number of board directors at the court case for MUPRA the other day.
I've got no problem with board directors engaging in activism as long as they're not doing it in their capacity as a board director. So they were engaging in that activism as private citizens, so I've got no problem with them engaging in that.
I think if we were to look at the major policy achievements of last year's board, a lot of them are to do with like increasingly progressive things. So for example, we've got stuff like Alicia Aiken-Rabin's We Are Women publication. We've got Bibi D'Souza pushing for an ethnocultural space on campus and Radical Sex and Consent Day. We've got Ed McMahon and the other grassroots aligned board directors pushing for like expanded environmental stuff on campus, among many other things. Could you ever see yourself getting behind these like overtly left-wing policies, which are nonetheless being like incredibly important to a lot of different students or a lot of like marginalised students' experiences on campus?
Yeah, I can see myself getting behind them very easily. The We Are Women campaign was brilliant. Again, what I said about the Radical Sex and Consent Day, I think it is a good idea. I was just a bit worried about last year in terms of it making it seem like a trivial sort of thing. So I can see myself getting behind what would generally be seen as progressive, because they are steps forward in terms of advocating a solid social position of encouraging people to get out there and actually learn about these things.
Okay, cool.
I guess looking at past years, Liberal candidates haven't done hugely well in the last couple of years. What do you think makes your campaign and general candidacy different, and what do you rate your chances?
I'm not backed by the official Liberal Club. I'm also running a vastly different campaign to what they were. So obviously I'm running on a more pro-business campaign, which is more likely to appeal to the business students and potentially the engineers as well with my Incubate program application. So those sort of things are what sort of differentiates myself from not only them but the rest of the field, by showing radical policies that are very viable.